and welcome to Legal Affairs. My name is Diamond Liddy, and I'm the public defender for the 19th Judicial Circuit. We are starting off this year with a bang, and we're going to shake it up a little bit this season, if you will. And I'm very, very proud to introduce our first guest of this season, if you will, Jim Bowdish. Good morning, Jim. How are you?
Good morning, Diamond.
And Jim's going to tell us a little bit about himself and talk about the My Lai Massacre and his involvement as a defense lawyer to one of the people accused of being part of that massacre. And that's going to be a pretty heavy beginning show, if you will. But this is going to be a legal affairs type season. So we want to start with you. And Jim, if you will, tell us, I know you practice in Martin County and Stewart, but just give us briefly, because we want to get in about what we're here for. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you went to school, and what you're doing now.
Okay. Well, right now I'm an attorney with a Career Buchanan law firm in Stewart. I'm the chief of the litigation section. I came to the law firm in 1973. I presently do commercial litigation, arbitration, and probate and trust litigation. But I had 4 years in the Army Jag Corps from 1969 to 73. So that's kind of what we're here about today.
Right. And so let's talk about that. How did you start your career there? What made you do that? Okay. And then where'd you end up?
Well, I graduated from Wake Forest in 1966, and I had an ROTC commission from there. So I was committed to at least 2 years in the Army. I went to law school at Stetson University, and when I graduated from law school, I had to go into the Army.
That was the commitment you made for them?
That was my commitment. So I had to go in either 2 years or 4 years.
Okay.
And since I had a law school degree, and they had increased the size of the Army Jag Corps by double due to changes that came about in 1968. So I applied for the Jag Corps and I was accepted.
Now, and I hate to stop you. What is the Jag Corps? What does that stand for?
The Jag Corps is the Army's law section that supports the Army, not only in military justice, which would be your court-martial work, but also in things like procurement and other things that involve legal issues. In my case, I was first assigned to Fort Hood, Texas, to the 1st Armored Division.
Okay. And
I arrived there in 1969. But in our particular case, the JAG office of the 1st Armored Division was across the street from the Commanding General's office. So we were the lawyer to the Commanding General of the 1st Armored Division, who's a 2-star general, General Bowles.
Okay, and this is during the Vietnam War?
This was right in the middle of the Vietnam War. I was involved in what we're going to talk about from 1969 to 1970. I spent 4 years in the Jag Corps, and then I came to Stewart and joined my law firm.
Okay, so let's back up. What everybody, or most people, have heard of the My Lai Massacre. In a nutshell, if you can, what I mean, we've heard of it, but what really happened? What was it?
The My Lai Massacre occurred on March 16th of 1968. 1968 was a terrible year for the war in Vietnam. In January, only 2 months before the My Lai event, you had had the Tet Offensive, in which the entire South Vietnam was attacked by elements of the North Vietnamese Army and also the Viet Cong, all the way from Hue in the north to Saigon, which was the capital of Vietnam in the south. And so the My Lai Massacre occurred when elements of the Americal Division located in the Quang Ngai province, which is in the northern part of South Vietnam, went into a village called My Lai 4. And they were expecting to meet heavy resistance by elements of what was the 48th Viet Cong battalion.
Right.
But instead, there were no military age males in the village. There were just women, children, old men, and the elements of the Americal Division, particularly Company C under Captain Medina, killed about, the estimates are anywhere from 300 to
Right.
500 villagers in that village. They were not fired upon. They suffered no casualties. And that was a very unfortunate incident in the history of the American Army.
Well, it's funny, getting prepared for today, I read up on this, and I had no idea it was that many civilians. It was astounding. I don't think the viewers probably realize. Okay, so elderly, women, children, babies were massacred.
Yes.
And people were held responsible. And you had the dubious duty of representing one of those accused of participating in that massacre.
I did.
And you were brand new, pretty much, right?
I came to Fort Hood in September of 1969, having just graduated from the JAG school at the University of Virginia. And so I arrived there. I had asked for military justice, which meant court-martial work, and Fort Hood was like the epicenter of that because people were coming back from Vietnam. Soldiers were coming back, and they were bringing bad habits with them and getting into trouble. So I arrived in September, and in October, I was called down to the JAG office, and that's where my involvement in the My Lai affair began.
And who exactly did you represent?
I represented an African-American soldier by the name of David Mitchell. He was a staff sergeant at the time, and he had been in the My Lai event, and he was accused of killing or shooting to kill at least 20 villagers in that event. So I was assigned to defend him in October of 1969. And that was, at this time, Lieutenant Calley, who was the platoon leader of that, he was also charged about the same time as Sergeant Mitchell was. So as I recall, we were the only two people that were charged. And the whole thing had not really come out in the news at this time.
Now, how many ended up being charged, Jim?
There were probably maybe a dozen. There were more that were charged, and then some of those charges were dropped.
Right.
In the case of Sergeant Mitchell, Lieutenant Calley, and maybe 4 others, there were court-martial trials held. And
for the viewers, give us the different, we hear about like Jag Corps, you hear about court-martial trial. What is the difference between a court-martial trial and a trial as we know it in America?
Okay, well, there are a lot of similarities. For example, the evidence that we use, pretty much the same. Cross-examination of witness, the same. Direct examination, the same. The biggest difference between, let's say, a federal court criminal trial with a jury and a general court-martial is the highest level of court-martial. You can be anywhere from, let's say, a year in prison up to the death penalty.
Okay.
So anyway, that is what the system is. But in the Army, you don't have a civilian jury. You can either go before the judge alone and let him hear the evidence, or you can elect to have a panel of officers. And in this particular case, in our case, we went with a panel of officers.
Okay.
Now, you could also do one extra thing, and that is have on your panel 1/3 enlisted men as opposed to officers. You could have like 2/3 officers, 1/3 enlisted men. In my 4 years in the Army, no one did that.
Okay.
And the reason was that the commanding general would normally appoint some high-ranking enlisted men.
Yeah, right.
And they knew the soldiers, and you'd do better with a panel of officers than enlisted. So it was just not something we did as defense counsel in the Jag Corps.
Well, you know, obviously this is Officer Mitchell was charged with the murder of approximately how many
He was
civilians?
charged with assault with intent to commit murder of at least, I think it was at least 20 civilians, which took place in a ditch at the end of the village.
Okay.
That was what the allegations were. Now, when we got involved in the case, when I got involved, and later a civilian lawyer got involved, Sergeant Mitchell never gave a statement, which is rather important if you ask me about how the trial went on, and I'll tell you about that. But he did not give any statement to the investigating authorities. We were called to go to Washington and appear before the Peers Investigation Committee, which was investigating the entire My Lai incident. And we had to go. And so the civilian lawyer, O.C. Brown, and I and Sergeant Mitchell went. And when we went down the hallways of the Pentagon, it was like you would see in the movies, reporters tripping over each other, flash bulbs going off all over the place. So we came in there, we went into the room with Sergeant Mitchell, and then he was called to the stand, and he took the Fifth Amendment at that point. So our presence there lasted about 10 minutes, and then we left and went back to Fort Hood.
What? Now that wasn't the trial. That was just
that was an investigation.
Okay.
General Peers was ordered by the Army to investigate the whole affair, and he did a good job of it. And naturally, he would call anyone who was there. But those people, once again, we have the same rights in the military to remain silent as you do in a civilian courtroom.
And the Miranda warnings and all of that.
You have those, you have search and seizure issues relevant, all the sort of thing that you would have in a civilian court, with the exception of the panel of officers. And when we finally got to our trial, which was about a year later, the panel of officers we had were all Vietnam combat veterans.
Wow.
So they understood what was going on because they had been there and done that.
Well, and I got to interject, you know, in our normal criminal justice system, you know, trials of this nature wouldn't happen for years. You know, so this isn't exactly a speedy trial, but it's sure fast when you think about the consequences. You know, to go to trial from time of arrest within a year is a big deal. And before I forget, was he incarcerated this whole time?
No, he was not.
Okay, so go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
If you'd like, I can bring you to the trial. Okay. So by the time we went to trial, we had 3 people on our team. The civilian lawyer, O.C. Brown, was from Louisiana. He was a criminal lawyer there. I was, of course, a military lawyer. And then I had another attorney in the Jag Corps that I asked to also participate. So you're allowed, especially in a big case like this, you could have 2 military lawyers. Okay. So the trial was not a long trial. It was handled by what we call the trial counsel in the military, or your prosecutor in civilian life, Mike Swan, a very experienced, highly experienced. Mike was in his 3rd or 4th year of the Jag Corps. I was in, by then, my 1st year.
Right.
I had tried some cases by then. But anyway, so we started, and then Mike put on his case, and he put on a witness who indicated that he saw Sergeant Mitchell with Lieutenant Calley firing into the ditch at the end of the village, and there were a number of people in this ditch that were killed. And there may have been another witness as well. I don't recall that, but there was at least one. And he put on only 2 or 3 witnesses. The reason for that is that there had been an investigation by Congress, who had interviewed a lot of these witnesses, taken their witness statements. And the congressman in charge of this, I think he was from Louisiana, refused to produce to the prosecution the witness statements. And the military judge, ruled that those witness statements, the people could not testify if they'd given a statement.
Right.
That was very beneficial for us. But Sergeant Mitchell had never given a statement, and he always insisted on his own innocence, that he did not fire upon any, and that not everybody fired upon civilians in My Lai. There were some that did and some that didn't.
Right.
So someone put Sergeant Mitchell in that ditch. So there was an interesting issue that came up. When the prosecution rested its case, the civilian lawyer, O.C. Brown, asked me a question. He said, "What do you think if we do this?" And he said, if we put Sergeant Mitchell on the stand and we knew he was going to deny that he had shot anybody or shot at anybody, what if we just ask him one question? And something like this: Sergeant Mitchell, did you shoot at anyone in My Lai on March 16th, 1968? And then his answer would be no. And I said to O.C., I said, I think that would be a very gutsy strategy. Gutsy because we don't know where we're going with this.
Right.
But we knew that Sergeant Mitchell had been well prepared. And Sergeant Mitchell presented himself very well. He was very good. He was very believable. He was a fine soldier.
Right.
He was dressed well. And so we prepared Sergeant Mitchell for his cross-examination on that. So when the time came, we did have another witness, by the way, who was at My Lai.
Right.
And he was also at the ditch. And he said that I left the ditch and I went down the line and then I saw Sergeant Mitchell. So basically what we had was a sort of an alibi defense.
Right.
In other words, right at the point where this particular event was going on, Sergeant Mitchell said that he was elsewhere.
Right.
And we knew that was what he was going to say. So anyway, so we finally, I think we put on that other witness first. And then I think we finished up with Sergeant Mitchell. So O.C. Then was asking, he was doing the direct examination, and he asked him that question. Sergeant Mitchell, did you shoot at anybody in My Lai on March 16th, 1968? And his answer was, no, sir, I did not. At which point, O.C. then said, no further questions.
Whoa.
Well, O.C. Brown was standing to my right. Tom Perricchini, who's the other military lawyer, was to the right of him. And I looked over to the left, and I saw Mike Swan drop his pencil because Mike had expected us to take Sergeant Mitchell through
the
a whole day of testimony.
Oh, very good,
And now he had to do something that everyone knows you really shouldn't do, and that is ask questions of a witness which you don't know what he's going to say. So he could have he had 2 choices: to do nothing and let that statement stand, or to begin cross-examining him. He chose to take the cross-examination route. And as a result, Sergeant Mitchell did an absolutely fine, credible job of presenting testimony that he basically said, I was not there at the ditch. I did not shoot at anybody during that particular mission. Now, that conflicted with other testimony.
Sure.
So when it went to the court-martial panel, they had to determine, is there reasonable doubt? So reasonable doubt is still a standard in the
same standard.
Same
right.
standard. And eventually they retired. I can't remember how long they were out. They came back and they found him not guilty of the charges. So that was a big moment in my life, and the entire episode was very educational for me, and so I was very happy to have served.
So Jim, that, even to this day, I know you're a, silk stocking litigator. I know everyone knows the reputation of your firm, but that had to be the highlight of your legal career, or one of the highlights.
It was definitely the highlight. Of course, I then went on. I still continued to do court-martial work, but once in the Jag Corps, you have done your defense work, let's say for the first year and a half,
right,
and you get good, then they make you a prosecutor.
Oh,
that was
see.
the way it
was.
It was okay. It was okay for the defense lawyer to screw up in the Army,
right, and not be that seasoned,
but not the prosecutor.
Well,
so I went through that system.
So from 69 to 73, you were prosecuting and defending first, but then prosecuting
right,
till the end.
That's exactly right.
In a nutshell, how many people was Lieutenant? Was it Callie? Lieutenant?
Yes, he was a second lieutenant at the time.
He was convicted, as I.
He was convicted.
Okay, but not too many others, were there?
He was the only person in the My Lai affair that was convicted by court-martial of about maybe 4, 5, 6 trials. The company commander, Captain Medina, a very fine officer, but who was there, but he was not in the village when the shooting went on.
Right.
He came along later. He was defended by F. Lee Bailey. And Medina had given a briefing the day before, and he said, we expect to meet the 48th VC Battalion, and we're going to engage them in a battle tomorrow.
Right.
Well, the intelligence was all wrong. The 48th VC Battalion was 150 miles away.
Yeah, obviously.
And so there were no military-age males. Now, the area was not a good area. It had been controlled by the Viet Cong for many, many years. And the company had suffered significant casualties in minefields just 2-3 weeks before. So there was a lot of dissension meaning anger among the soldiers
Sure.
towards the locals,
right,
because they knew where the minefields were. People were hit by sniper fire and killed. That was the war in Vietnam back in 1968.
Sure. And obviously there's been all kinds of articles. I know you when I was looking at your resume, you were on the NBC News. I mean, this was a big deal, obviously. And there was a periodical written, the Army Lawyer, that tells, if
Right.
people want to read more about it. What is that, Jim?
Well, this is how this thing came up after 50 years. I got a call from Lieutenant Colonel Kyle at the Jag School in Charlottesville, Virginia. He said that the Jag Corps was going to put out a publication. The Army Lawyer is the publication.
Okay.
I don't know whether this is a monthly or whatever, but in their March 2018, they were going to do a war crimes edition concentrating on the My Lai.
Oh, so this just came out?
Yes, it just
great.
came out, and the article about me and my involvement in the Jag Corps appears here. And
Okay.
Colonel Kyle wrote that article, but that wasn't the only one. There's an article about the Cali trial and other other things involving My Lai and its aftermath. So
Okay. Yeah, and I read. No, that's fascinating. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, you asked me about. Remember, I'm a greenhorn. This is 1969. I've been at Fort Hood for like 6 weeks. I am assigned to this case.
Oh my goodness,
And,
I can't even imagine.
So they sent Don Oliver of NBC News down to Fort Hood, and they wanted to interview Sergeant Mitchell. I said, absolutely not.
Sure.
Absolutely, you've got to be crazy. I would not do that.
Right.
But then they wanted to interview me, and I was reluctant to do that. The post information officer wanted me to do this. He just about ordered me to participate. So
Right.
I think it was November 14th of 1969. I was interviewed by Don Oliver of the NBC News and about Sergeant Mitchell, and I basically said to him that the evidence I'd seen did not show any guilt on his part.
Sure.
But that I also hoped that the Article 32 investigating officer, I'll explain that in a minute, I hoped he would recommend that the commanding general, General Bowles, Major General of the 1st Armored Division, not prefer charges against Sergeant Mitchell and send it to a general court-martial.
Right.
And as a matter of fact, the Article 32 investigating officer is kind of like a grand jury,
Okay.
except he's a single officer,
Right.
and he has to make a recommendation based on the evidence before him to the commanding general. In fact, within a couple of weeks after that, the investigating officer recommended to the commanding general that he not bring the charges and call a general court-martial.
Wow.
So I was kind of right, but of course there was so much going on that it was difficult for the commanding general to just ignore.
Let it go. There's so much publicity.
Yes, there was.
We've got about a minute 20 seconds left. I have a couple wrap-up questions I have to ask. How long was the jury out, Jim?
You know, I don't remember that. I'm thinking that's a guess. They were not out for more than a day.
But they were out for a day. Okay.
I'm not sure. I don't remember that. It was definitely more than half a day, but I don't think it was a full day.
Right.
So they came back fairly quickly. And by the way, it takes 2/3 to convict.
Okay.
In the military jury, you don't have to have an unanimous. In any event, they acquitted him.
Oh no, that's extraordinary. Well, this has been wonderful. I can't thank you enough for your service and what an extraordinary experience. I mean, and it obviously has made you the great litigator that you are today.
I learned a lot doing criminal law in the Army. And I think rather your public defenders and prosecutors also learn a lot. I mean, they'd probably do more trial work than any other branch of lawyering in criminal cases. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for
wonderful.
asking. Okay.